Hey guys, week 7 big summary and messiest issues. I'm trying to make these shorter and more to the point, so here we go, jumping right in, okay? We only had one chapter to read this week, chapter 9, analytic philosophy. So I'm going to start by providing the big summary, and then we'll go into the messiest issues. Just a few messy issues that I wanted to touch on, and of course, we will talk way more about all of this stuff on Thursday, but hopefully this helps set the stage. So, first of all, analytic philosophy is chapter 9. It's kind of not switches, but another way of referring to this philosophical viewpoint is as linguistic analysis. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So, first of all, this is not a systematic philosophy. This is different from realism or idealism. This is sort of its own thing. It is mostly about clarification, which is the second bullet point. Clarification is the point. Problems of the past were about unclear messages or misunderstanding, as opposed to some of the other philosophies we looked at, which have dealt with the nature of knowing or what is good, what is evil, so on and so forth. This is really about specificity in language and the lack of specificity in language being a cause for many problems. Third point, excuse me, logical positivism, which is always hard for me to say, dissects whether sentences are verifiably true or have to be investigated. So there's two ways of constructing sentences. That's one thing, just as a heads up, we'll want to dig into on Thursday. Next, linguistic analysis, which again is used interchangeably in the chapter and in practice with analytic philosophy. So linguistic analysis is a move away from trying to construct a perfect language or rigid ways of interpreting common language. It tries to give a better description to analytic philosophy. So it's kind of a more modern take, even though analytic philosophy is a pretty modern philosophical viewpoint and movement. It's a more modern take on, oops, there we go. It's a more modern take on that. And so probably the second, I guess the second half of the chapter, excuse me, starts using the term linguistic analysis as opposed to analytic philosophy. It also describes folks who promote this viewpoint as analysts. And so we'll talk a little bit more about clarifying those on Thursday, but just know that we'll be using those somewhat interchangeably, although as any good analyst would do, we have to be specific in our language and understand what we mean when we say these terms. Okay, next point. This helps teachers clarify what they propose to teach to students, which obviously affects students. In some ways, this boils down to the power and role of language. If I had to just really encapsulate it in like the simplest form, it would be that point. Analytic philosophy boils down to the power and role of language and understanding language and language use. So I keep adding to it. Next point, language uses affect both teachers and students. Mentioned that in an earlier bullet point. And finally, even if words don't have inherent meaning, they should be used more precisely. So that's sort of if I had to say what's the charge of an analytic philosopher, that would be it. Okay. I am going to ask you again, I'm going to keep pushing y'all to provide your own big summaries. You did a great job last week. You've been doing a good job, but last week I really feel like we picked up on you guys really led the charge on your own summaries. So we're going to keep doing that. But hopefully this kind of helps you, sift through a lot of the chapter because it is a little bit different than some of the other systematic philosophies that we've dealt with. Okay. So some of the messier issues, and again, this is just to hopefully be a touch point, another way of looking at things. We're going to really obviously talk about all this stuff on Thursday, but I've got 5 kind of broader, messy issues. So first, are these analytic, or should we say analytic philosophers or linguistic analysts? I've talked a little bit about that on the last side, but either one's okay. Just know what we're talking about. They can be used interchangeably. Again, linguistic analysis is sort of the modern take on analytic philosophy. But for our purposes and just starting to build an understanding of this way of viewing the world, we'll use both. Okay. So does this dismiss philosophy? In some ways, kinda, yeah, a little bit. I don't think it sets out to do so, but I do think that it's the viewpoint that analytic philosophers take does maybe not dismiss, but tries to move forward or move in a different direction from some of our systematic philosophies that we've looked at. Again, they're primarily concerned with the role of language, and they are convinced that more specificity and clearer understanding of language and the way that we use language and interpret would help us think better, would help us construct better, or help us avoid or fix problems, and then therefore construct a better society. That obviously applies to us in the field of education very aptly. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But dismissed may be a strong word, but this is a philosophical viewpoint which tries to move beyond some of those more traditional systematic philosophies like realism, idealism, and basically says really this boils down to language and use and understanding language. The next point, which flows from that, is a question: is this just looking at words? No, it certainly involves looking at words, but it's much, much more than that. It's really about understanding, analyzing words, analyzing use and context, shared definitions, missed shared definitions, so on and so forth. But it is way, way, way more than just looking at words. This I think often can be confused with sort of like a paralegal activity of, well, let's go through and identify each word and its shared definition. And no, it's much, much more than that. And so we'll sort of slice and dice that that differentiation on Thursday too. Next, thinking, teaching, knowing all require language, but is that all? No, it's not all. I don't think that the chapter is, or analytic philosophers would say that language is it. But I do think that, they make the point, for example, can you even think without language? Now, that's an interesting question. That's sort of like the question that we dealt with earlier, or one of the questions that helped us deal with some of the philosophies. The sort of popular adage of if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a noise. It sort of feels like that, but it is a little bit different. This is a bit more concrete, as is, I think, this whole philosophical viewpoint. But the point here is that language is the most fundamental building block to learning, to understanding, to constructing knowledge, to constructing common knowledge and or society. And so it's should be the basis for all philosophies, right? That's kind of where this starts. So again, that's something we'll want to unpack a little bit. But I just want to really highlight there that language is the centerpiece of this philosophy, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that this is all about language. It's about the importance of language and striving to use it being language in a better way. And finally, I think that when you're reading this chapter, you can kind of get to a point where you're asking a question similar to this, which is, does anything mean anything? So the point is made over and over again that context matters, that definitions can change, that words don't have inherent meaning, and that even if they do have shared definitions, that's only in certain contexts at certain times, and those can shift, and they can shift quickly, and they can shift significantly. For example, I think one of the strongest examples of this is the viewpoint of, well, the law is the law, or we should do so because the law says so. And the point being, what is law? If you say that in 1950 in the United States, what you're referring to as the law may be very, very different than what the law is in 2018. And so the point being that, yes, things mean things. Yes, words mean things, and that's extremely important. But it's not about necessarily just the inherent definition. It's about the holistic definition. And that's kind of the point I think that we're going to want to, again, really hone in on Thursday. Okay, so try to be a little bit quicker on my run through this week instead of letting it drag on. Hopefully, again, this just kind of helps you get through and start thinking and exercising some of your muscles for our conversation on Thursday, which is really, I think, where we dig in and start creating a shared understanding of what this philosophy boils down to and how we can help it use it, with the others to understand our context of higher education. All right. So as always, reach out to me if you need anything, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on Thursday. Thank you.